Good evening, everyone. I would like to use this time to briefly introduce you to our Hebrew class. And this is our class number 7. We have had 6 previous classes, and the course is entitled Hebrew to Study the Bible. And there's a reason to name it this way because our interest in learning Hebrew, besides being able to read and write somewhat, our whole intent of learning biblical Hebrew is beyond just reading and singing Hebrew songs, right into the very element of studying the biblical Hebrew text. And we will be using the book of Genesis, chapter 1, particularly the first 5 verses, as our fundamental reference, so that by the end of the course that you will be able to explain a lot more about biblical Hebrew so that you can explain the text. And that is our end goal in the entire course. We call it learning biblical Hebrew, and we're not looking at biblical Hebrew as purely a language. The reason being is that you can't actually learn biblical Hebrew and speak it and people would understand you. Biblical Hebrew is really no longer used in common everyday. The kind of Hebrew that we use today in common conversations, it's called modern Hebrew, and it's simplified and it has somewhat slightly different grammar. But when we come to reading the Bible text in the Hebrew, then learning biblical Hebrew will be very, very important when we use it to read the Bible. Now, reading the Bible is probably the easiest of the segments of learning biblical Hebrew. Reading does not necessarily mean you can understand. Reading means when you look at the biblical text, you can actually read it out loud and read it accurately. And that in itself is a feat because you are looking at brand new letters which you have never seen before, and you're looking at sounds that you never knew you could make those sounds. And then you could look at the biblical Hebrew text, like, say, Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 to 5, and you can actually read it properly. And probably you can also learn to sing some Hebrew songs. This is the first part of our course. And I would explain to you with a little bit more detail. The second part of the course is a bit longer, and it's to learn to study the Bible. And if you are to learn Hebrew to study the Bible, there are a little bit more things to learn besides the letters and the sounds that you read. You've got to know a little bit of the grammar and how biblical Hebrew works so that when you read the Bible properly, you'll be able to understand it. And our end objective will be to be able to explain it. And hence, this entire course is designed for the adults, not for the children. We cannot learn biblical Hebrew at our age like a child. We don't have the time, nor do we have the patience. But we need a little bit of time and a little bit of patience. And with the help of some tools, we will be very successful to learn biblical Hebrew and to study the Bible. And I'll explain to you what it means to study the Hebrew Bible. This is our course structure. So let me begin by explaining that this is a course structure for adults. You see, when children learn a language, they are sharp. They can hear very well and they can memorize things very well. We are not in that class anymore. We don't have the time, and even if we tried, our brains would not allow us to remember so much. And so, in our way of studying biblical Hebrew, adult style learning would be very much by understanding. Now, the idea of understanding is that I would need everyone to be able to ask the question of why. Why do we do it this way? Why is the rule like that? Why do we make such sounds? Why is it in this case there is a dot and in the other case there is no dot? So, why is a very important question if you are an adult. And so, in this course, you are expected to ask, why does it sound that way? Then the other one is how. How do I actually make that sound? How do I shape my lips? And all of these, both the why and the how, is very important. Now, I'm going to give you the what you are going to learn, the rules, right? All of these are in a set of books, 2 volumes. And you all will have to get a copy of the 2 volumes. They are all the slides for the course. And besides that, as an adult learner, you will need to have a notebook, old school a little bit, and you've got to write your notes as much as you possibly can, particularly those areas that you cannot figure out. Put your why and how questions and then ask them. We will all be on a WhatsApp group. At the same time, the classes will be recorded. So I would assure you, we'll only do it over Zoom and we will record the entire class. Now, each lesson is under 1 hour. The reason being is that as adults, we would not have such a long attention span, especially when we learn something new. Usually, the classes are between 30 minutes to 45 minutes. Very rarely do we ever arrive at an hour, but we will in 1 or 2 classes. Now, over Zoom means that you can actually review the classes at your own time. That also means that if you don't make it to a class, you can still watch the video at your own time. And you can watch it anytime you want, as many times as you want. The reason is that it is not possible for adults to learn everything in one sitting. It is quite difficult. And I think it is also a bit difficult to expect people to ask a lot of questions in the first sitting. If it's the first time you ever see some of this information, sometimes it needs time to process. And so you need to invest some time to look at your notes, to review a little bit, maybe 15 minutes every day, if as necessary, so that you will keep the lesson fresh in your mind until the next week. Now, this is important because you cannot come to the next class totally fresh, as if you've never attended class before. We are not going to spend so much time reviewing the classes. We will do some review, but we are not going to spend that much time. When we first begin the classes, it'll be slow and steady, but I hope that you would find a momentum, that you would learn to review your work. Beyond class 7, we will have new classes in the future, and you will be invited to attend them if as you need it. And that will help you in the event that you might have missed the class or you have forgotten the material or you need a little bit of newness in your revision. So let me explain to you the course structure. The course structure works this way. The first set of 12 lessons is on the Aleph Bet. Now, the word Aleph Bet, Aleph is the first letter, the name of the first letter in the Hebrew letters. Bet is the second letter, so Aleph Bet. We are used to the Greek, so we call it alphabet. So it's alpha, beta. So it's alphabet. In Hebrew, we call it Aleph Bet because the first letter is Aleph, the second letter is Bet. So we will learn the letters, we will learn the sounds because the letters itself are consonants. And the sounds will help us make sense of what we read. And so as we learn to read, we will learn to speak it. And this is biblical Hebrew, by the way. This is not modern Hebrew. However, as adult learners, for the purpose of understanding, we do need to learn some rules. In most instances, Hebrew classes avoid rules. If you are a child, we will probably or most likely avoid talking about rules because children learn by repetition. But adults don't learn by repetition. Adults learn by understanding. And if you understand, you will remember. So you need to ask the why questions and the how questions, and then rules will come into play. And so we will need to learn some rules. We don't have to memorize all the rules because it is not possible for people at our age, but because it's in the books and it's also in your notes, you need to know where to look for the information. And that one, you have to figure out your own note-taking system. Now, the rules itself, there are some rules that unfortunately you must always remember. Why? Because without which you can't move on to a more advanced level. For example, if you don't memorize the alphabet, the letters in the Hebrew language, there is no way that you can move on to the grammar and structure because we will be assuming you already know everything in the alphabet. And so it is necessary by the time we finish the 12 lessons that you will already have memorized and be very familiar with the letters in the Hebrew language. Now, there's one more thing that we will cover in our course, which is Hebrew thinking patterns. This is necessary because the Hebrew language is Eastern. And so we need to maintain an Eastern thinking ideas, Eastern thinking patterns, Eastern way of looking at things so that Hebrew becomes meaningful. We cannot look at the Hebrew language from a pure Western viewpoint or a pure English viewpoint. Now, I would like to state up front that the Hebrew language is very similar to the Malay language. If you know Malay, you would find that it is quite helpful. The area that is very similar to the Malay language is the sounds. If you know Chinese pinyin, that will also help. The reason I'm saying that it's very similar to the Malay language is because the way you pronounce biblical Hebrew is very rigid and it's very similar to Malay. What you see is what you get. Now, the second language that you must have a fair idea would be English. We will want to learn a little language, linguistics, because we need to learn a little bit Hebrew based on the English linguistics. It is not identical to English way of structure or grammar, but it has a lot in common. Now, when we learn English, we probably never learned the linguistics behind it. And so most of us will have to learn a little linguistics along the way. And so we will spend time to help everybody understand. The English language allows the understanding of how you can modify the Hebrew language because it's in a sequence. If it's in the sequence, you can do things at the beginning of a word and at the end of a word. Now, the third language that will be very, very useful is Chinese. And the area that is very relevant to the Chinese language is the imagery. The Hebrew language is an ancient language, very similar to the Chinese language because it is very imagery in nature, it's very concrete in nature. It expresses things in a very pragmatic and practical way. And so the grammar and the concepts in Hebrew works a little bit like Chinese. It tells a story, and we will learn a little bit more in the later segments of our course. Let me briefly explain to you how the alphabet session works. I'll give you some slides to give you an example of what we will learn. We have 2 volumes that everyone needs to purchase. It's only 100 ringgit for both the books. It's in very nicely bounded hard copy that you could actually open up when you have your classes, and it's very good for review. And it's Hebrew to Study the Bible, volumes 1 and 2. It contains all the slides which we are using in the class. Volume 1 has a number of sections, but these 4 sections would be what we will learn in the first 12 sessions. The first 12 sessions will cover these 4 segments. Now you find that why are we spending so much time? The reason why we are spending 12 sessions, and by the end of these 12 sessions, you should be able to read. You should be able to know how to read. You should also be able to know the rules to read. You see, as adults, we can't do monkey see, monkey do style, Just because I read it this way doesn't mean you can follow. You need to know the rules so that you can read it your own way, so that you can have your own style. You may not make the sounds exactly like I do, but you will be able to make it similar because you would know why and you would know how. And the rules and the methods will be explained. And so by the end of these 12 sessions, you can sing songs, you can read Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 to 5. And you will understand the basics of the biblical Hebrew language, particularly what we call the Hebrew root system. Let me show you a few slides of what we may be doing in the first few lessons. There are rules. I would not apologize for it. And I would want you to know that we are going to minimize all the rules. You don't need to know everything under the sun, but you need to understand why. By understanding why and with the notes you have in your own notebook based on your own note-taking styles, you will be able to appreciate the Hebrew language as much as we all can. So when we first talk about these alphabet, you learn about how many Hebrew letters are there. what each of these numbers actually mean, that they are all consonants. They don't make the sounds. They actually shape the mouth. It uses your lips, your tongue, and your throat. And you learn about how sounds are made with the idea of open and close. You need to observe patterns because that's how we learn. Look at the patterns. You learn a few of the technicalities of the alphabet. What is a suffix? What is a label? What is a guttural? What is a dagesh? You will also learn exceptions. Now, these are some of the things that we will talk about. Then we will learn the alphabet. Now, the alphabet, we will spend a little bit more time. Why? Because it's new to everyone. And slowly you understand why they have such names. How do you remember them? I would give you a song that you can find on the YouTube, and we'll learn to sing the order of the alphabet. And that's how the children learn in the first place. It's a very nice song. And then we'll learn the order, because the order of the alphabet is extremely important. When we learn English, the alphabets from A to Z has to flow in a particular order. Same thing in the Hebrew language. It must start from Aleph, and then it must end with the Tav, right? Right here. Now, besides this, you will also learn a little bit about patterns, and I'll tell you more about the patterns. If you catch the patterns, it will help your learning rapidly. If you don't catch the patterns, you will learn things a little slower. But I give you all this information so that you can always go back and refer to it. It is part and parcel of learning, and because the Hebrew language being new, we will spend a little bit more time at the start to familiarize ourselves and to appreciate how intelligent the Hebrew language really is. This is an example of rules. Now, the idea of rules is that's how biblical Hebrew works when we talk about making sounds. There are what we call syllable or sound structure. And there are things that we must always know. And when we say must, very rarely we will say must and all, but we do. When it says must and all, you must remember. When it says most of the time, which is most of the time, because in biblical Hebrew, there is a lot of exceptions. Very seldom do we say must. And when you see the word, then it must be important. And we will learn the rules of how the Hebrew language actually works when you want to make a sound. For example, here we have this word, and it's split into three syllables: Devarim, Devarim. And so, why is it called open? And why is this called close? And what do all these dots and symbols actually mean? We will learn all of these because it's important. And so, the rest of volume one will be what we call the grammar and the structure. Here, we find the grammar and structure is twice the length of the alphabet. The reason why it is much longer is because there is a whole lot more to learn. Once you have the alphabet under your belt, that is the assumption when we get into the grammar and structure. In these 24 lessons of a total of 36 lessons, which is shorter than the time that one can have a baby, you will learn all that you need to know about biblical Hebrew. Now, this is important because this is your base. And once you learn all this, you cannot unlearn it, because this is where you would use for the Hebrew Text Bible Study, HTBS for short. Now, I'm highlighting this, the Hebrew Text Bible Study, and it's an ongoing class. And the intent of doing that is so that you have a chance to learn and practice how to parse, how to translate, and finally, how to explain. This is our end goal, to explain. If we study the Bible and we cannot explain it, we have not achieved what we have set out to do. So, learning the alphabet gives us a start, learning the grammar gives us the base, learning the Hebrew text Bible study is our ultimate goal. So that when you look at the Hebrew passage, you must be able to know what to do. How do you parse it? How do you translate it? What is all the meaning in the grammar and the imagery of the entire passage? And then finally, after you know and understand it, you should be able to explain, because if you can't explain, it means that you don't know the text. And so our final goal is to be able to explain the text. In these sets of classes, we will also learn how to translate and explain passages, learn more about Hebrew words. How do we learn the meaning of Hebrew words? And one final set of things that we will have to learn is a little bit of an advanced topic. We will not cover it in our grammar and structure. We will cover it in our Hebrew text Bible study, which is the cantillation marks for syntax. Once we have covered this sometime in our Hebrew text Bible study, you will be one of the most well equipped Bible students on earth, I would say. The reason being is that you would know more about the Hebrew language and how to work with the Hebrew language together with an interlinear Bible app or apps, because apps is going to help us where we cannot remember. And thereby, we will be able to study the Bible for the rest of our lives. And that's the life skill that we're talking about. Now, in the grammar section, you find that we will learn about nouns, definite articles, conjunction. You see, all these are linguistic terminology. It's very much when you look at a Bible passage, how do you understand what the Bible passage is saying? You can't until you understand the individual components of the verses. Once you can break it down into these components, then you will be able to understand the text, what the Bible is actually saying, all of these. Once you have this under your belt, somewhere in your notes as well as in your textbook, you will be invincible by using an interlinear Bible app, and then you will be able to parse, translate, and finally explain. Let me end by showing you this on the screen. As you can see, it is a slide that really has very little meaning to you right now. And the reason is that you don't recognize any of the letters on the screen. This is Hebrew, and it's biblical Hebrew, and it's copied from the Hebrew Bible. And this is Bereshit Aleph. This is Genesis chapter 1. And we have 5 verses here. And these are the 5 verses that we will keep repeating so that we will understand what it says. When you look at something like this, first of all, you need to know what each letter is. Once you know what each letter is, you need to know what the sounds it makes, which is down here or up here, right? All these are sound symbols, which we call nikud. When you learn the alphabet, you see that there is dots in some of the letters, and then there are various sorts of dots, and sometimes you don't have a dot. You see this here? This doesn't have a dot. This have a dot. And so as adult learners, we will ask why. What are these symbols? These are important questions to answer. If you understand, then you will be able to read. The question would be, how would you read? What is the sounds that you make? Where do you pause? Where do you stop in your translation? So let me give you an example. First verse is Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey. So it reads this way: Bereshit bara Elohim et hashemayim va'et haaretz. V'haaretz haita tohu vavohu. V'choshek al pnei tahum. V'ruach Elohim merachefet al pnei hamayim. Vayomer Elohim Yehi or Vayhi or Vayar Elohim et Haor Ki Tov Vayafdel Elohim Bein Haor Uvein HaChoshek Vayikra Elohim Laor Yom V'lachoshek Kara Laila Vahi Erev Vahi Voker Yom Echad. Sounds like a foreign language, and it is. And the intent that I wanted to show you before we end is that by the end of our classes, you will be able to read. You will be able to understand why you read it this way. You will be able to understand which of these are verbs, nouns, prepositions, definite articles. You will eventually get to know how to learn about the words itself and what they mean, not just in simple terms, but in full Hebrew understanding. That is our life skill to learn how to study the Bible. And once you know this and you practice this, you will know your Bible well. All right. I shall see you all then